Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all of you. And thank you so much for joining us for this launch event. My name is Sandra Pepra, and I'm the Director for Gender, Women and Democracy at the National Democratic Institute. NDI, as we are known, is a not-for-profit, non-governmental, non-partisan organization that works to support the aspirations of people around the world for democratic governance. Today, I have the pleasure of leading this event, which launches a new tool to support the achievement of gender-intentional local governance. In 2015, NDI reviewed its strategic direction, and there were two important demographic shifts that we had to take into account. The first was, of course, the youth bulge. And we now know that there are more people under the age of 35 in the world than ever before, and this will continue to grow. The second was the mass urbanization that we were finding around the world. Politically, also, we understood that politics at the national level was getting stuck. There were many places where the local government level provided more space for new voices, for renewing the link between citizens and government, and for ensuring better service delivery and accountability. But all this urbanization led to new challenges for local government as well, one of which is the fact that in many, many countries, the move to cities is very heavily female-faced. Now, this move provides opportunities for women in ways where they didn't have them before. For example, more access to formal jobs, also more access to higher levels of education, and some loosening of the restrictions around gender norms. But they also provided new challenges as well. And we felt it was important that in that set of challenges and changes, women should be seen by their local governments and not be invisible before the state. So this is the reason why we focused in on that proximate level of local governance as a place where citizens and government really came together in a very close attachment. So today we're launching a tool that we believe bridges the gap and particularly for women and girls in all their diversity. First, we're privileged to have an opening message from Ambassador Nina Hachigian, who is the first ever United States Special Representative for Cities and State Diplomacy. Following her previous first role as a Deputy Mayor for International Affairs for the city of Los Angeles in California. So let's hear what Ambassador Hachigian has to say about why gender-intentional local and regional governance matters.
Thank you, Sandra, for that introduction, and thank you to the National Democratic Institute for inviting me to speak with all of you. My name is Nina Hachigian, and I'm proud to be the first Special Representative for City and State Diplomacy. The creation of this new role reflects the Biden administration's understanding of the importance of cities at the national and international level. Today, I'm thrilled to help launch a new tool from the National Democratic Institute, NDI, the Local Government Gender Assessment and Action Plan, or LGGAAP. That aims to assist local stakeholders in exploring barriers that women, community members, and those that serve in government face when accessing services and engaging with the local government. It is designed specifically for local level actors, including local government officials and staff, civil society organizations, and community members, many of whom will be working on developing local governance ecosystems, literally building the institutions, practices, and processes that can deliver services, support resilience, and promote equitable economic growth. I'm particularly pleased that the tool is compatible and complementary to other kinds of efforts for increasing inclusion and gender intentionality of local and urban governance. Lasting and consistent change will only be achieved by developing a critical mass of expertise and solidarity across networks. For example, linking those who are using the LGGAAP tool with the Change Network, which I helped to start when I was a deputy mayor. It stands for City Hub and Network for Gender Equity. Change, which is you can find at citieschange.org, provides rich examples of how cities are supporting gender equality, and together with the LGGAAP network, they can present a dynamic force for gender intentional local and urban governments that transforms the lived experience of women in all their diversity and their communities around the world. We know that local leaders in the United States and around the world play a pivotal role in citizens' daily lives. They are at the forefront of solving global problems that affect all of us, problems like climate change, COVID-19 and pandemics, fighting off cyber attacks, combating human trafficking, threats to critical infrastructure, and more. And although much of this work is funded by and sometimes led by the federal government, local leaders are the boots on the ground, the innovators, the keepers of knowledge about the best way to effectively solve problems. The creation of my new team at the State Department is a sign that increasing numbers of people understand this reality. My role at the department is to ensure that the nation's local leaders are connected to our foreign policy because we face collective global challenges. The lines between domestic and foreign policy are becoming increasingly more blurred. So why does gender intentional local and state governance matter? Local governments are in a vital position to address these concerns, the concerns and priorities of women. Local governments are also the main experience most people have of governance. They are the closest to citizens, and for many women, the first point of entry into politics. So how can we collectively help address gender inequality, which continues disproportionately to impact women and girls around the world? In 2021, the Biden administration launched the National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality. This gender strategy underscores the U.S. government's commitment to advancing the rights and opportunities of women, girls, and LGBTQI persons, both in the United States and around the world. It also cemented our longstanding belief as a nation that gender equality and equity are both a moral and a strategic imperative. That roadmap to help our nation close the gender gap was a positive step toward promoting the economic security, safety, health, and well-being of women and girls in our nation and around the globe. We have a lot more work to do ahead of us as we continue to aspire to build a world with equal opportunities for all people. Inclusive governments are simply better equipped to address global challenges such as climate change, economic disruptions, democratic backsliding, human rights abuses, pandemics, and other humanitarian emergencies. With the launch of NDI's tool, I applaud your efforts in addressing gender inequalities to improve governance at the local level, and I encourage all of those who care about gender equality in local government to make use of it. My hope is with this tool and with other efforts, local government engagement with diverse groups of women increases, women's representation in elected and non-elected positions also increase, and women's connection to local government improves. This tool will serve as a valuable instrument to help its users explore the barriers that women face when engaging with local governments, empowering women's voices in local government, in policy creation, and in city planning, contributes to more accountable cities and allows more citizens to thrive. So thank you very much again for having me, and I hope you have a terrific conversation. Thank you.
We'll pass on our thanks to Ambassador Hachigian for those opening remarks. And now I'm going to ask my colleague, Cole Speidel, to give us a brief overview of the tool so you can see how we have tried to address the issues that Ambassador Hachigian called the ecosystem for local governance, the institutions, the practices and services, and trying to make all of those more gender intentional. So Cole, handing over to you now.
Thanks, Sandra. As mentioned, and I believe my colleague Aaron is going to bring up a PowerPoint. As mentioned, I'll provide an overview of the Local Government Gender Assessment and Action Planning Guide, which is now available in English, French, and Spanish on NDI's website. We've shared that link in the chat, and we're also going to circulate these documents after this event. On the next slide are some acknowledgements, because publishing a guide like this requires many hands. And a huge thanks to my former colleague, Emma Yardley, the guide's principal author, along with Susan Markham. Thanks as well to NDI Ukraine's office, whose work inspired this guide, Georgia colleagues for their inputs and validation, the Open Government Partnership, or OGP, for their invaluable collaboration, and the National Endowment for Democracy, who funded this guide's development. Next slide, please. Local and regional governments, as those closest to the people, should proactively adopt approaches that attempt to reduce gender inequality and its negative impacts, and this guide equips them with a process and tools to do just that. This is what NDI means by gender intentional governance. Local leaders make the decision to apply a gender lens to governance, to identify and understand gender inequalities, gender-based constraints, and inequitable norms and dynamics, and then take steps to address them in an inclusive and consultative way. And the challenges are vast. Women earn 60 to 70% of what men earn globally, are more likely to experience food insecurity and human trafficking. United Nations data from 2022 shows that women hold just 34% of seats in local deliberative bodies and 26% in national ones. Local leaders, driven and informed by community voices and public feedback, can take steps to eliminate discriminatory barriers to resources and services by changing how the government works, whether in a big way through new investments in street lighting, wider sidewalks, or educational programs, or in a seemingly small way, such as by holding public meetings at a place and a time that supports access to public transportation and childcare. Our theory of change for gender intentional local governance is if local governments incorporate gender perspectives and gender transformative approaches and operate with the principles of transparency, accountability, and collaboration, then women can be empowered to take a meaningful and active part in their communities and have greater agency over their lives. On the next slide, and throughout the guide, we mainstream openness, transparency, and participation with a focus on inclusion and do no harm. This guide has been developed so that it can be used in conjunction with the Open Government Partnership's local action planning processes, but it can also be used alone. This guide outlines how local governments can incorporate gender perspectives and gender transformative approaches step by step. First, building an alliance of stakeholders inside and outside local government, who then collaborate to get to the heart of an issue with an assessment, and finally, translate their findings into an action plan. Our research indicates that this guide and its associated research tools fill a gap. There's no similarly detailed step-by-step methodology for local and regional government officials to adopt a gender-intentional governance approach. NDI has worked with local officials in dozens of countries over the years, and we understand they face many challenges. Resources and capacity for action are low, public expectations are high, and demands may be coming from community members and national leaders at the same time. The process in this guide is specifically designed to be low cost and includes ready-made research instruments and templates for goals, recommendations, and commitments to make it as easy as possible for anyone to pick it up and get started. Survey, focus group, and interview templates are available as standalone downloads to encourage users to tailor them to their own needs. No technology is required to use the guide, but there are instances where technology for communication, reporting, and feedback channels can be useful. The guide has 3 phases. Phase 1, making the decision to conduct a gender assessment, requires elected officials, staff, and civil society partners to first answer how a gender assessment will fit into the administration's goals or address an issue. Perhaps women residents are reporting a specific challenge, or a program is a source of complaints. If a gender assessment is warranted, the next step is to secure leadership buy-in and resources. Note that local leaders advocating for a local assessment can come from anywhere: unelected staff or the civil service, an elected mayor or local councilor, or from community leaders in civil society. But a process supported by senior local leaders and managers will have a higher chance of creating meaningful change. With support from local leaders secured, a gender assessment team should be formed. The team should represent a cross-section of the community and government, including elected and unelected officials and staff, and representatives from marginalized and historically excluded communities. The guide outlines how open and transparent recruitment can work, ways to empower the assessment team, and emphasizes that the team should include both women and men. Lastly, before the assessment begins, the team should plan its internal and external communications for the duration of the process and public verification of results. With these pillars in place, we move to the next assessment phase. The gender assessments team's first task is to define their specific objectives relevant to the local context. Objectives should be clear, easily understood, and realistic. The next two steps involve research, a review of publicly accessible government documents, civil society reports, and other credible sources will frame the assessment and define data needs. Next, the team will design and deploy a combination of surveys, focus groups, and interviews to collect data. Data gathered is then analyzed, potentially through three lenses: local institutional barriers and opportunities for women, sociocultural norms, attitudes, and beliefs about women's participation in local government, and women's individual confidence, capacity, and connections that affect their engagement with local officials for information, services, and resources. Informed by this data and analysis, the assessment team can begin drafting the report through an open and participatory process with the community. For example, a draft report can be published alongside calls for consultation and means for structured or informal community input. And this brings our assessment team to the last phase of the guide, where their findings are translated into an action plan. Initial recommendations for action should be drafted and verified with residents, with final recommendations added to a revised report and presented again for community feedback. After the final report is made public, the gender assessment team will use it to create a gender action plan. This gender action plan is a discrete list of ambitious commitments that will be co-created, implemented, and monitored by government and non-governmental stakeholders. Our guide includes a template for commitments, as well as sample targets, milestones, and indicators. The gender action plan and its commitments should align with any existing local action plans. Finally, the action plan's implementation must be monitored and periodically reported on. The assessment team can stay in place to provide this oversight, or the government can commit to the regular release of reports. To close, this guide is a global public good that we hope is of use to local governments, civil society, and practitioners. We welcome your feedback and questions on the guide, and if you use it, we'd love to hear your experience. Back to you, Sandra.
Thank you, Cole, for going through that and for leading this, this design work that we've been doing. Ambassador Hachigian mentioned that local leaders are the boots on the ground when it comes to local governments and engagement with their citizens. And I think we are going to have a short conversation now with some incredible women with huge amounts of expertise to actually demonstrate that particular fact and to hear from them what gender intentional local governance means. And first up, I have the tremendous privilege and pleasure to introduce Mayor Rohey Malick Lowe, who is the first woman mayor of Banjul, the capital city of the Gambia in West Africa. Incidentally, her father held the same position many years ago. But Mayor Lowe has been in place and elected since 2018, and she comes from the business sector and is now a leading voice in the networks of local executives, including being president of the Local Elected Women's Network of Africa, known by its French acronym REFELA. She is president of the Africa Capital Cities Sustainability Forum and second vice chair of the Global Parliament of Mayors. Mayor Lowe, you are very welcome this morning. Thank you for being with us. I know you've had a very challenging week in New York City, where we are all participating in the Commission on the Status of Women. Mayor Lowe, when I first kind of understood what you were doing, it was in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And you took innovative and new ways to reach citizens. I remember you had this, you mobilized youth ambassadors or youth envoys to go out there and talk to citizens. And it just seemed that you had understood the need for that connection, and that actually, as the chief executive of Banjul, that you had to find new ways to reach citizens at that critical moment. Please tell us, what does a gender intentional approach to local governance mean for you as you work in Banjul?
Thank you very much, ma'am. And thank you very much for the question as well. The example you used before is so adequate as it explains situations like that of healthcare, for example, which is better handled at the local level because it is the closest proximity to the people. When COVID-19 pandemic struck, local governments were able to easily see the trend of the virus, and we are able to address it faster and in more appropriate way than any other forms of government. And as the other speaker said, local governments are closer to the people. When you're looking for impact, you have to come down to the local government. We are closer to the people, we understand issues, we know where they are, we're meeting them every day. So if anything happens, like the pandemic that has struck and put off guard, nobody was there to be able to do it better than local governments, and I mean mayors. In Banjul, there were a lot of things that were happening, and the national government were put off guard because they don't know where to start. They don't know where people are. They don't know how to do it. So basically, it was the local government that was in the forefront to make sure that we mitigate the situation.
So Mayor, what were your first steps when you understood that you were really going to be on the front line and that Banjul, where as many countries, the capital city was going to be really very vulnerable, and your population was going to be very vulnerable to the spread of this virus? What were your first steps? How did you, for example, reach out to mobilize your youth ambassadors? What did you do? How did you do it?
The first thing that we did was to use our voices. That is to use the radios, we use the newspapers, we even go around trying to announce to the people that the virus is here, the virus is dangerous, the virus is real. Because you have to understand one thing also, that in Africa, when the virus struck, many people did not believe it. So everybody was just going by their businesses. Everybody was doing what they used to do and what they were used of doing. So nobody cares about anything until it starts killing people. This was when they start to know that it is real. And thank God that our voices also was so powerful. Then people start to understand that this is what the mayor is saying. Every day I have to go out and say something, whether on the radio or on the newspapers. So when they had me saying every day that the virus is real, this was when people also started to move back, to understand that the voice of the mayor is so powerful.
And did you find that you had to take particular steps to reach the women in Banjul? I mean, because obviously in most places, the impact on women of the virus, not only in terms of getting sick, but in terms of increased care burdens, not being able to work outside the home any longer. How did you address those kinds of increased gender burdens in your messaging at that point?
So obviously, when the COVID struck, it comes with a lot of things, like gender-based violence was in the increase. People don't have food to eat. So we have to mobilize. We have to start looking for partners, to have medicines, to have PPEs. This is because without that, you cannot put them at the homes, because if they don't have food, they have to go out to find food. So we start mobilizing, we start talking to partners, we start talking to business people. So through giving them the PPEs, having food, and trying to even give them incentives. This is when we were able to have them stay at the homes.
And my last question for you, Mayor, for the long term, what processes and strategies are you putting in place to ensure that Banjul continues to take on board some of the issues around being a gender intentional city?
So basically what I lobbied for, and which is very, very hard, is to have to mainstream gender in the council budget. So this is actually and monitor and evaluate its implementation. So this was very, very difficult to have, because you have to understand that in Africa, or let me take it back to the context of Banjul, we have a lot of councillors that are men. And for them, the women empowerment is not on the top of their agenda, because in Africa, it's like women should just belong to the house. And in the house also, there is a corner called the kitchen. This is where we should belong to. So to fight to mainstream gender in our budget was something that was very, very difficult. But at the end of the day, I was able to have to mainstream gender in the budget. And if I say gender in the budget, it means more of women empowerment. So thank God, we think this is the way forward. And
Thank you.
The most difficult part is to have partners. International partners are not interested in local government. And this is the fact. Most of them are interested in the national government. Most of them, for me, I am looking at them as they just want to have, it's like a soul. Let me go to the national government, have a picture with them, post it on my Twitter, then have a little fame or little visibility, and then that's it. But there is no impact. This is the truth. If you want to have impact, you must go to local governments. Without local governments, you cannot have an impact. What you can have is a 10-minute show on the Twitter, and that's it, period. So partners also, international partners also, should go down to the local government when they want to make a change. But if you just want to stick with the national government, you can just have a 5-minute show, and that's it. But no impact, ma'am. And this is the truth.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Lowe. I can see already there were a couple of questions in the chat that you have instantly addressed, and we have partners listening in. So let's see how we continue the discussion in a moment. Let me also now move to our colleague, Dr. Betilde Muñoz Bokosian, who is the Director of the Department of Social Inclusion at the Organization of American States. In this capacity, she leads the organization's work on the inclusion of vulnerable populations to ensure they can exercise the full extent of their human rights. And her portfolio includes directing and supporting work on migration, forced displacement, and refugees, as well as the social development of vulnerable populations. Betilde, thank you so much for joining us. It seems to me that your portfolio puts you at the center of the causes and consequences of the patterns of movement that are happening in Latin America as they are happening elsewhere in the world. Given this, why do you think that a gender intentional approach to matters for local governance in Latin America?
Thank you so much, Sandra, for the question. And really, I want to congratulate NDI and the Democratic Governance team, my dear friend Kristen Sample and her colleagues for prioritizing the preparation of this tool. I saw a question in the chat where someone was saying, how is this tool different from many others that are out there? Of course, I cannot speak for NDI. I'm just a colleague and an outside observer, but from my review of the contents and the one that we just heard from the NDI colleague, we can see that this tool is really using lessons from previous attempts at generating ways to assess the gender dimension at the local government. And so that's very valuable, that it's kind of building on the knowledge that has previously existed, and also doing it from a comparative perspective, because we tend to do this in sub-regions or regions of the world. I really like the approach of doing this from a global level. Regarding your question on the importance of why it matters to have a gender intentional approach to government, especially at the local government, and Ms. Lowe just illustrated a very concrete example in territory. For Latin America, what we see is that, as in many other regions of the world, women continue to experience situations of inequality, discrimination, etc., in all dimensions of their rights, not just economic, social, cultural rights, but also in civil and political dimensions of their citizenship. And the data speaks for itself. I'm not really going to review it. I'm actually want to focus on what you're asking me, Sandra, which is a situation of human mobility in the region, in the Americas, and putting the lens on the situation of women. If we, and especially I want to, and I'm glad that you asked this, because I saw in the document and background papers that there is an intention to implement or pilot the tool in Ecuador, in a city that is facing important volumes of Venezuelan migrants and refugees. And here we must start saying that we are seeing something called, now being called, the feminization of migration, in which women are migrating at similar levels as men. And I'm talking about Venezuelan migrants and refugees, over 7.1 million that have been forcibly displaced in recent times, but also people moving from Central America to the US, Nicaraguans to Costa Rica, and all points of our hemisphere that human mobility is occurring, and it is occurring intensely. Women are migrating on similar levels as men, but as in any situation, women are not, women and men do not experience the process of migration since the moment of deciding to migrate, the experience in the transit country, and their experience in the destination country is very, let's just say, is additional vulnerabilities that women have to face. Just to point out very concrete ones. For instance, we know that women tend to be overrepresented among the victims of human trafficking. Data by IOM says 71% of those who are victims of human trafficking are women and children. There's another particular, especially that local governments have to face, another affectation or another vulnerability women face in their migratory process is what I call the dangerous cocktail of between xenophobia combined with machismo, and sometimes additional situations such as aporophobia or racial and ethnic discrimination that also affect and kind of transform the reality that women experience as they migrate. There's many things that we could mention or map out that could be useful for the implementation of this tool in Ecuador. Situations such as how to ensure an effective regularization process that needs to account for the reality of women, for instance, who tend to be those who take care of those at home. The situation of sexual harassment, the withholding of wages, and for instance, another one that I would point out that is going to be very relevant for a local government in Ecuador and many other, and is already for many other local governments in the region, something that humanitarian agencies have identified as survival sex, when the process of migration faces corruption and women are forced to grant these sexual favors in order to pass from one country to the next, or be able for the authorities to recognize the passport that they're carrying, and so many other situations. So just to briefly, Sandra, map out some of the things that we should be paying attention regarding the situation of women and why a gender intentional approach matter. If we have that approach, we are going to have data that will make evident where these vulnerabilities exist. we are going to be able to design policies that can be conscious of that reality, and ultimately we are going to improve the responses that we have at the local government.
Thank you, Betilde. And I think, you know, you have really captured some of these dynamics. And whilst you talk obviously about your region, I think many of us can see exactly the same dynamics in other regions. And to your point, the feminization of the migrations that we are seeing, both across borders and within borders, is can be a desperate point for many women. Are there any concrete examples of things you've seen done in different places that you would like to share with us today?
For instance, just perhaps a couple of examples of policies that have been conscious of this, the situation that migrant women face. In countries like Colombia and Peru, adjusting the times in which people can go get the regularization process started, and where documents can be delivered to the authorities in schedules that work out for women who have to be, you know, maybe take care of the home, but while also maintaining a job. That's like very concrete things that have been done that are conscious of this gender perspective. Other ones, especially as women migrate, or let's just say pass from one country to the next, and I have to say here, just as a point of context, a lot of the migratory movements we're seeing in our region are happening by land, where women and men, but you know, we're looking at the situation of women, pass by bus, sometimes walking, and you know, they're literally walking the border between Colombia and Peru, and the possibility of training those customs and migration authorities, as well as those who are managing the flows of people with a gender perspective, for instance, giving them a protocol in terms of identifying a potential victim of human trafficking, right? Or ensuring that situations of, or you put in checks and balances so situations of corruption can be prevented, and avoiding women having to be victims of corruption situations. And this we've seen in the border, for instance, between Colombia and Ecuador, as well as Ecuador and Peru, that are having very interesting coordination. Those are some of the examples. And I also want to mention a project that we have been implementing at the OAS. It's called the Role of Local Authorities in the Reception and Integration of Migrants and Refugees, in which we have actually given voice to over 200 local authorities throughout the region in over 20 cities of the Americas, really mapping out what are the best practices and what are the gaps too in terms of receiving and integrating these populations. And we're actually launching this report at the Cities Summits of the Americas happening in Denver in April.
Thanks very much, Betilde. And I think, you know, your point about just simple things like changing the opening times of local government offices, you know, that just speaks to women's time poverty, as we call it, is great. And I'm excited to hear more about the reports that your local authorities on the reception and integration of migrants, you know, what sorts of things that they are facing and how are they addressing them. But I think you also had a very interesting point about the nexus between the national level and the local level, because obviously most places borders are national issues, but then once people have crossed the border, then they almost immediately walk into a local government jurisdiction and situation. And that again highlights the fact that local governments, as Mayor Lowe so eloquently said, they are the front line, they are the first receivers. They do meet the people almost immediately where they are. But thank you very much, and we'll come back to you, Betilde, in due course. And our final conversation really is with two of our colleagues from the municipality of Ozurgeti in Georgia, in Europe, not Georgia in the United States, but Georgia in Europe. And we were privileged to be able to work with colleagues there to develop the tool. And in some ways, they know its potential and its opportunities better than we do, because they've actually worked with it. So let me quickly introduce to you Nana Tavdumadze, who is the Chief of Staff in Ozurgeti, and she has been in that post for a number of years, and she represents the municipality in various international partnerships, including the Open Government Partnership and Open Government Local. Besides her duties at the local council, she is leading and engaged in various projects, including participatory strategy for the tourism development and participatory budgets in Georgia. Prior to her public service, Nana worked in the national and local TV companies, and this gives you a sense of her focus and her background. So Nana, thank you very much for being with us today. And let me just also introduce our other participant from Georgia, Natia Vashalomidze, who is the Executive Director of Guria Civic Center and has diverse experience of working in various CSOs as a project manager and public relations manager over the last 10 years. And I think the important part about having these two voices at the same time is to really demonstrate the importance of the partnership between the local government officials and institutions and civil society, because by all means, neither can achieve what we want them to achieve in gender intentional local governance without each other. So having introduced them briefly, let me ask Nana the first question, which is, given your experience now as Chief of Staff and the fact that you have implemented a number of transparency and outreach measures, such as live streaming government sessions, releasing public expenditure, and becoming a member of the Open Government Partnership Local, how are you seeing these efforts shaping Ozurgeti into a more gender intentional city?
Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much, Sandra, for your kind introduction. And I'm very happy to have this opportunity to share this experience. And I'm more than happy to answer to your questions. First of all, let me tell you that Ozurgeti is an administrative center of Guria region, which is located in West Georgia. I represent the local government, and you are right. Yes, we have been a very advanced municipality in recent years, and we were very actively involved in the cooperation with local communities and the civil society. And this municipality is one of the first ones that joined OGP in 2016, and we also had the action plan for that, and we already implemented 2 national action plans. But then we also had the OGP localization, and we elaborated the first action plan. Why I'm saying that this first action plan, this was important because under this action plan, we undertook to share the transparency and accountability and civic engagement and promote all these initiatives, and also to develop the services and to offer these services to the public, especially to the most vulnerable public, and also to implement the gender-sensitive activities. And these are very important issues for the local government. Now, as for the valuable experience and practices or lessons learned that we have had, let me say that this is very much linked to NDI. They are our strategic partners. And let me say that it is very important that we have the priority document, we have the programmatic budget, and the gender aspects are already incorporated and mainstreamed. We can talk about the specific examples, and we had a cooperation with NDI, and as a result of this cooperation with NDI, we had a waste management action plan, and there was also the gender components into that. That was about reducing the household waste, and that was very important for empowering local women and for promoting gender equality. And In terms of the long-term objectives and the short-term objectives, we have some plans, and we will have trainings and seminars for our target groups, and we will develop the skills, especially the skills that women need, because, well, municipal waste management can become the source of revenues. For example, they can do recycling or composting, and they need to be well aware of the benefits of recycling or composting. And of course, we need to have specialists to deliver the trainings to raise awareness of the local population. As for the longer term plans, this is the economic development, because women can be employed in the waste management sector. And by the time when in Georgia when we have the waste separation, because right now we are doing it, we are not doing it, we are just starting to separate the waste. And when we develop this system, then we will have other enterprises that will be working for recycling of the waste. And this way we can mobilize the resources, and also we will reduce the streams of waste that go to the landfill, and there will be less disposal of the waste, and there will be more recycling. What the municipalities are doing for that? It is very important that gender approaches should be taken into account at a local level. By the way, we have a very good gender equality council at a local level. And why we have this council? We want to promote the issues of women. And also at the municipality, we have the women's room. This is an open space for women that promotes also the economic empowerment. We have information centers, consultation centers, and the purpose of these services is to keep the people updated about the municipal services and to raise their awareness and to help them to start their business activities. Also, we have the children's corner, the library, and what is also important, well, Ozurgeti really plays a big role in the overall promotion of gender's roles and women as well. What I can say in the end, in consideration of the local context, Ozurgeti municipality tries to eliminate the barriers and to work for the better gender equality, because these barriers are very bad, of course, for the people. And what we try, we want to elaborate and implement the gender-sensitive policies, and to increase and promote women's participation in decision-making processes. And this new instrument that was already mentioned today, this LGGAAP, will help us a lot to continue these efforts and to make sure that our municipality is more focused on meeting the needs of women, and also to help the women to unlock their potential. And we are so happy that we are selected as the pilot municipality for the implementation. Let me express the hope that, well, I hope it will deliver very positive results. And again, I hope we will have another opportunity to speak about the success stories.
Thank you so much, Nana. That was great. Let me go to Natia, because it seems that Ozurgeti has something of a developing ecosystem that is speaking to some of the key issues that local governments face. What Ambassador Hachigian talked about, the institutions and the processes and the practices of gender intentionality. What does it feel like from civil society's point of view?
Greetings. My name is Natia Vashalomidze, and our organization is Civic Center of Guria, and we work in the Guria region. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. And the issues that we are now talking about, all these issues are very important. And women need to be empowered and supported in many different areas. But what I'm going to say today, this is a bit different. And today, let me speak about other important things on behalf of the civil society of Georgia. Let me start by saying that no other civil society organization is attending this meeting now today, and there is a cause for that. I am attending this meeting because I want to speak about the crisis that we have in Georgia. But before I do that, let me speak about my organization. We have civic activists from all the 3 municipalities of the Guria region, and we try to advocate for the people and for important issues. With the support of NDI, we were able to provide information to the local government and to ask them to address the problem. For example, our villages do not have water supply. There is no public transportation, and we don't have a sewerage system in the small towns. And also we have a problem of stray dogs. And then as we have surveyed and studied the issue, these are the bigger problems for women. And then we started to do some advocacy, and we tried to cooperate with the local authority. And we have been using the mechanisms, the statutory mechanisms, and also the formats suggested and implemented by NDI. Now, let me get back to the issues I already mentioned. This year, in February, the Parliament of Georgia started to deliberate on the law, and the law is against the civil organizations and NGOs, and most specifically, the law will limit the activities of the NGOs and civil society organizations who are getting funding from the US or from other European states, because the law will say that these organizations are like agents. So this is about the foreign assistance and
Natia, I'm going to ask you, please, to see if we can channel and focus on the relationship between civil society and local governance. I appreciate the bigger political issues that you are raising, but I think, and I can see that there will be a linkage between what you're suggesting and the ability of civil society to act. But if we can just keep within certain bounds, that would be helpful for us today.
Thank you very much, Sandra. You are absolutely right. And yes, I am not talking about cooperation right now, because it is impossible to speak about cooperation, because the civil society organizations in Georgia said that they will not cooperate with the authorities, with the central government in any format, including OGP working group. And today they made an announcement that there will be no cooperation with that. So there will be no cooperation in this context, and it will not be relevant. This is why I had to provide this background information about what is happening now in Georgia, and what issues we're now facing, because the civil society is now facing the issue of this new law that will limit the activities of the organizations.
I think it's important, because in many countries around the world, we're seeing what we call this shrinking of civil society space. And usually, and actually what you've indicated is that it is happening, if you like, at a national level. And we had assessed in many places that the space at the local level for actual partnership and activity is less constrained and more open. But what you're suggesting is that even at the local level, there will be challenges with bringing civil society voices to the local government. And that is definitely a problem, because within that, obviously, women's voices and the ability to really convey the perspectives and priorities, and even for women to be in themselves engaged, will be locked out.
Right now, we don't have any opportunity to do this, in this particular moment, because we, the entire community, the entire society had to go out into the streets, and for a few days we have been protesting in the streets, and thousands of people are there in order to protect our interests, because now the government is going to pass the law, and this law replicates the Russian experience, because years ago when Russia passed the same law, then the NGO activities were banned, and if we do the same, then there will be no cooperation, and we just cannot even speak about any kind of cooperation. It will be irrelevant.
Well, thank you, Natia, for bringing that perspective to us, and it does illustrate the challenges that not only are arising in not only Georgia, but in many of the countries that we work in, and we really hope that there will be a resolution and a way forward that continues to keep the civil society space open. It is so critical, and I know that Nana will agree that they cannot do their jobs without civil society, and so I'm sure that this is going to be an issue that we will come back to in many different ways over time going forward. We have a few minutes left, and I would like very much to see if there are questions that have been dropped in the chat that we could ask our experts and guests to potentially address. So I think the first question actually was somewhat addressed by Betilde, the difference between this new guide and other existing tools on gender equality and assessment. And I think, we certainly didn't design a tool to duplicate what was already out there. I think what we've tried to do is develop something that is a very practical step-by-step guide that can walk every kind of local government through the process, because we know that there are many different levels of capability and capacity. There is in the city space, there are mega cities and satellite cities, but most of us just live in regular small cities, and really dealing and providing a tool that allowed for the capabilities of a broad range of city governments and institutions was one of our key objectives. So I do think that that is something that is slightly different. But again, Nana, you are one of the few people here who have actually worked with the tool. Would you like to give us a short sense of how it worked for you in Ozurgeti?
As already mentioned, Ozurgeti was selected as a pilot municipality for implementing this tool. It is very important that we have the national plan for OGP and we have the local program. I am very happy that with the civil society organizations, we had a very tight cooperation, and we completed all this, and we met all our obligations, and the NGOs and the Ozurgeti OGP forum was there, and local civil society organizations from our region are there, and we are very actively cooperating. So with their initiative, in cooperation with our agencies, we created very interesting policy documents that incorporate this gender responsive and gender responsible approaches, and also the document was approved by the local council, and it was a very important document. Another important document was the policy document. That was about budgeting and finances, because gender approaches and gender aspects were already incorporated, and there is funding allocated for social programs, for women's programs. And yes, there were some problems, but still I hope that the program will continue. And we are using the instruments in our activities. And I think that when we create the documents that will help us to deliver our services to the target population, and this is how the voices of women can be heard at local municipalities. That can be a good instrument for that. Some time ago, we signed a new memorandum of understanding with civil society organizations. And let me underline that, yes, as Natia said, the process is a bit halted and hindered right now, but I hope that it will continue as before, because our local government expresses the willingness, and we understand that it is possible only through participation and cooperation, and we can create services and deliver services. And I think these instruments are the perfect opportunity for us to continue our cooperation together in the future.
Thank you very much, Nana. Can I ask my colleague Cole, there's a question in the chat about how using the LGGAAP tool can support OGP local program action and development. And I'll leave that to sit with you a second, Cole, but go to Betilde. Have you got any further ideas or experience on the whole issue of gender intentional public financial management? Mayor Lowe gave us the news that she has had to fight to introduce gender mainstreaming into the local government budget in Banjul. Do you have any other experiences or approaches to share with us from your perspective and what you've seen around Latin America?
Excellent question. Because, you know, if you tell me one of the lessons from seeing the implementation of gender conscious approaches is that political will is really manifested with the allocation of funding. And, you know, here we have a lot of rhetoric in terms of countries wanting to, and, you know, I think there's a genuine intention of ensuring that the standards for the inclusion and participation of women at the local and national level are complied with, but you often don't have the fiscal space to be able to allocate funding. And a lot of competition in terms of the allocation of resources in local governments and national governments, not just for gender, but for so many other things that are priorities in Latin American countries. So if you tell me, you know, some of the strategies and things that I've seen work to ensure the allocation of this financing for the implementation of this approach and these type of tools, I believe that it always helps, of course, to establish and generate buy-in from the international community that can provide certain financing for these type of activities. But more importantly, and really what gives sustainability, is to sort of generating, I don't know, effective coalitions at the local level, where everybody is kind of, we say, remando al mismo destino, no? Everybody pedaling to the same destination of ensuring that the funding is allocated, and more than the funding, that this type of approach is implemented and has an effect, concrete effect on how policies are designed and implemented, and hopefully in the results of women's experience with accessing their rights. So it really works connecting with academia, with civil society organizations, perhaps identifying champions in these local governments that you can use and kind of create this potential positive coalition, effective coalition that can help also influence conversations at the political and policy levels. And nowadays we have to speak about what's being seen in the media, in the radio, in social media, and the different platforms, sort of kind of maintaining the conversation and perhaps elevating the cost of not allocating funding and really showing political will to implement this type of approach.
Thanks very much, Betilde. Cole, I'm actually going to ask you to do two questions. First of all, the OGP link, but second of all, I think there's a question here about whether the guide gives any ideas about how you actually engage the marginalized populations, women and the marginalized populations in cities, because it's not always easy given the size of cities. So how do we, what advice is there to engagement, and what advice is there on the OGP partnership?
Sure, and thanks to all the speakers and presenters who've gone so far. In terms of OGP, the guide is designed and the steps are designed to mirror or be analogous to steps within the Open Government Partnership local action plan creation. So it should be able to complement those various steps for co-creation of these commitments, and then the adoption of a gender action plan with indicators, objectives, milestones that can then be tracked. So it aligns with the OGP broader principles of openness, transparency, and accountability. But then with respect to those specific commitments and the documents and these reports that are going to be generated through the assessment and action planning process, those can be mirrored directly. And so within the guide, you'll see a commitment template for the gender action plan, and that's actually borrowed from the OGP local action plan. So they can be complementary to one another. In terms of your second question and reaching out to marginalized and underrepresented community members, I mean, that's where as Natia has indicated, civil society is so important because they have those connections to residents. They can reach people whose voices aren't being heard, and that communication is essential. So they're a force multiplier for the local government when it comes to making that outreach. But as you mentioned, contexts are very different. You have to account for language barriers, technology barriers, geographic distance. Georgia and Guria especially, very mountainous, and so it's difficult to reach certain areas in these communities. So those have to be accounted for. But civil society is probably your one of your best bets in terms of that.
Thank you very much,
I
Cole.
wanted to.
Please,
okay.
Yes, Mayor Lowe, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the situation of Gambian women. And
Please,
since 2020, I think it is important for you to know that since 2016, Gambia has experienced significant improvements in the rights of women, including the rights of women. Women hold high-level political positions, including the vice presidency, Speaker of the National Assembly, and my humble self as the mayor of Banjul, as well as in the legal sector, both domestically and internationally. Women bear the burden of challenges from weak service delivery in cities and villages alike, from accessing water and electricity to rubbish collection. The availability of public transportation and experiences of infrastructure design, such as spaces for walking and street lights for safety. However, COVID-19 has come with lots of challenges, but has also taught national governments the importance of local governments and the importance of investing in healthcare. Mayors were seen all over the world at the front line, in most cases flanked by the civil society organization, helping their communities, which has made a significant impact. Domestic violence was in the increase, as I said before. Schools were closed, and many women have to stay at home to take care of their children. And many men has lost their financial status, and it was difficult to feed the family, which trigger anger towards the women. Women were most affected because they could not go out to do their informal jobs, to earn the little they used to. Going by these examples, we can agree that women and children were most affected during the COVID-19. However, the good news is the impact of local government was visible and recognized to the world. Yes.
Thanks very much, Mayor Lowe. I was on a panel yesterday, and I reminded folks that our former board chair, Madeleine Albright, used to say that she was not a pessimist. She's an optimist who worried a lot. And I think in some ways what you're describing is exactly that situation, whereby there's hope, there's lots of space for optimism, but we have to worry. And that worry gives a focus to our intentionality going forward. There was another question which spoke to whether or not there were constitutionally mandated measures for women to be parts of local government as of right. Well, that is something for every political context to work out for itself. And we know that local government itself is a very heterogeneous kind of sector. There are very many different types of local government, some fully elected, some partly elected, and so forth. So there is no sort of one blueprint for local government in any case, but some do have quotas assigned to them, some do have reserved seats, and so forth. So it's a patchwork, and each context will have a different dynamic with that. And I think, you know, there are places where the numbers, the representation of women at the local government level is far higher than their representation even at the national level within the same country. So again, we see that the local government level is a very good entry point for women's engagement. And many women move from, as Natia mentioned, from civil society into the local government space, and may then or may not decide to go to the national level. But we have understood that this is a very important pathway for women's political engagement and representation going forward. I also wanted to reflect that when Nana and actually when Natia were talking, some of the issues we hope to explore more with this local government gender action plan and assessment tool are the linkages to things like, for example, climate change. I think, you know, Nana's description of the initiative around waste management did both. It focused on a clear issue for natural resource management and waste management, as well as women's role in the front line of those issues as well. And that will be something that in the next round of deployment and partnerships that we are going to do with the tool, we'll be looking at much more carefully. There is a question here in Spanish, and I wonder whether one of our interpreters could please, we've got it. I think this is Sri Sufyan, who, if I remember rightly, is representing and very connected to the Huayru Commission, the global network of women at the grassroots. And I think, you know, your question is a good one, but I would say probably we don't have enough information and data on to be certain sure of what the institutionalization of this approach will mean yet. And that is something we are going to be doing more thinking about. We are trying to set a baseline now and then look at how the rollout of the approach over a number of different countries, which we will do. It's on our website. Others can pick it up and use it. And Cole has already asked, please let us know, give us the feedback so that we can really begin to develop the database on what happens when a local government decides to really adopt and take on a gender intentional approach. And we will need to be reviewing that not only from the perspective of the local governments, but also from the perspectives of civil societies and indeed of individual women's experience of their engagement with those local government institutions. Great. Are there any more questions? We have a few minutes left, but not wanting to keep folks longer than is needed. As Cole has said, the tool is now available on the website in English, French, and Spanish. Because of the Ozurgeti example, we also have it, I believe, in Georgian. So you know, that is it's a very particular language, but at least it is available to many people in Georgia. Can I ask our speakers perhaps for their last parting thoughts? And let me start with Natia, a last parting thought for this morning from your perspective.
Thank you very much, dear Sandra. What I wanted to say that in this environment, the civil society organization cannot cooperate with the local government or the central government right now in this moment, because they try to stigmatize and discredit the entire civil society sector.
Thanks, Natia. And I mean, our thoughts are with you, and we stand in solidarity with you in this moment, and we fully appreciate what you're saying to us. And as I said, unfortunately, it is the experience of civil society in many spaces across the world where we're working. But we're with you in solidarity, at least, and hope that there will be a turn for the better in Georgia. Nana, parting thoughts from you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Once again, I would like to reiterate that the Ozurgeti municipality is open and ready to cooperate and to implement new projects. We also reiterate that, especially when it is about the vulnerable population, the women, and especially when we are talking about implementing and institutionalization of this very important instrument, this really matters a lot for us. We also highly appreciate the co-creation process and participation, and this is why we stand open and ready for participation. As for the OGP new program, we have started working on new commitments, and we have compiled and elaborated these new commitments together. It is already uploaded on the platform, and with regard to these new approaches, we are going to use this new instrument to meet these new obligations and new commitments or liabilities. And for the institutionalization and for the elaboration of policy documents, we stand ready for that to ensure the sustainability, and Ozurgeti municipality will be there. And I think I can be optimistic, and hopefully things will be much better than before. And together we will be able to continue our activities and reach positive outcomes and results. And I'm confident that we can do it together.
Thank you very much, Nana. And again, once again, thank you for your partnership on the development of the tool in the first place. And Betilde, final thoughts from you, given what's happening.
Very briefly, and especially, of course, I sit in a position where we work with governments. So perhaps one point I wanted to make in closing is how much we value the work that governments are trying to do at the local level, and from the standpoint of migratory movements in the region to receive and integrate these populations. We understand that local governments are in the first line of receiving these people and ensuring their protection. But at the same time, an invitation to understand these arrivals as an opportunity to improve and develop their cities. And the second point that I believe, because a lot of what the colleagues have said resonates with my own thinking, but perhaps one thing that I would add is to ensure that in the implementation of this tool and having a consciousness that some populations live in situations of vulnerability, this concept of intersectionality, right? That we used a lot in the work we do in the Department of Social Inclusion at the OIS. And, for instance, when the pilot in Ecuador is implementing, to understand the particular reality of a migrant who is also a woman, who happens to also be Afro-descendant, or who happens to also be from an indigenous peoples, right? So, the cross-cutting reality that people face with their own identities is also important in applying and implementing this type of tool.
Thank you so much, Betilde. Mayor Lowe, we're going to give you the final word, please, to close us out, and your final reflections on the issue of building gender-intentional cities.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to say that this is a very good initiative, and I want to appeal to each and every institutions and partners to come down to the local level, solidarity for the local level, where there is the impact, and this is the way to help those that are vulnerable, as the women and youths. So if you want to have an impact, go to the local governments. If you are looking for something else, please go to the national government. But impact, you can only have it at the local level. So everyone should have a full solidarity for local government. This is where the mayors, councillors, and everybody is very close to the community. So let's all come together and solidarity for local government. Solidarity, giving solidarity to local governments means giving solidarity to your very own family, to your very own. So please, let's think. If you are thinking of yourself first, it's not being selfish. That means you are thinking of local governments also. So let's come together and solidarity for the local government. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor Lowe. I think if anybody wasn't convinced of the importance of local government, the conversation that you led this morning has helped with that. And I really do want to appreciate the time that you've taken out of your schedule here in New York. Also to Betilde and Nana and Natia, thank you so much for being with us. My thanks to my colleagues who pulled this together. And very importantly, my thanks to the interpreters who have tried to make us connect across languages and time zones and everything else. It's been a great hour and a bit. I've really enjoyed listening to people. I've seen a lot of old friends have joined us. So we hope that you will take forward the conversation and use the tool and let us know how it goes. Thank you so very much. Over and out from NDI.
Thank you so much.